So I've adopted Scrum and set up my first sprints. However, my developers are not estimating correctly. I think they're lazy. Priorities keep changing. And all right, well, these are common problems I'm going to help you solve.
Let's finally talk tech in plain English. I'm here to tell you how to take control of your company's technology.
All right, so as you're running your sprints, you're going to find common problems that show up. I'm seeing here a bunch of people, it's the same issues over and over that I see. Now, the most important thing is to remember that whatever process I give you, that you need to make the process work for you and not you for the process. A good way to always gauge whether the process is a good process or not is the fruits of your labor. If you're seeing things trending into a better direction, then you know it's a good process. If not, then you need to tweak or adjust, or maybe even throw out the process and change it altogether. So these are the I'm seeing everybody's questions here. It seems like they're the same themes over and over again. And for 20 years, I also get the same questions. So I'm going to help deal with the 5 most common problems that you all have. And let's jump right into it. First, if you haven't watched a video about how to manage your projects using Agile SCRUM, make sure you watch that video. This should be a good follow-up for you. Let's see, first common problem, my estimates are always off. So this is actually a very common problem that most teams have generally in the beginning when they start adopting this. That's why I tell everybody it takes about 3 sprints before everybody sort of finds their right groove. There's multiple things that you can do to help get you to a more optimized estimation process quicker. So there's one thing that you can do which is called estimation poker. There's various names for it. There's actually tools online for you to take a look at and see. But what you do is you describe what is the epic, what is the user story, what are the whichever task that you're costing out. And you ask everybody in your team collectively. If you have 3 developers, you ask all 3. Everybody that's involved in the development process to estimate it out. And what they do is they write it on a piece of paper and you count 1, 2, 3 and everybody flips over. This way you don't have one person on the round table where you ask the first person, he says it's going to take me 10 days, the next person tells you 3 days, and so the second person gets influenced by the first and so on. When everybody flips over at the same time, it's the most honest answer they have. Now, they also have egos in play. So somebody who says it's going to take me 15 hours and my colleague sort of knows it's going to take you 10 hours, really. It doesn't look good in front of their colleagues. And so they really want to make sure that they estimate as truly as possible. Now in that, you will still have variations. You'll have the overzealous person that can finish anything in 15 minutes. And you'll have the over-conservative person that everything is way overcomplicated, over-engineered, and takes 3 weeks to get the smallest things out. So what you do is you take the top and the bottom and you have them justify it. So the guy who has the most estimated hours, you ask them to justify it, and the least, you ask them to justify it. And unless they agree to adjust, because sometimes you're right, I forgot that there's these other complications that create a cascade effect, or the person who overestimates, once you listen to their justification, you realize, oh no, I didn't want every bell and whistle in there. I just want this one thing. And so it alleviates any miscommunication up front. Estimation poker is actually a really good methodology for you to use with your developers and to get them to the most honest and the most accurate estimations. Another technique is if you have a team member that's chronically off, he's just every sprint off, either over or under. What you do is you can actually keep track of actuals. It's an additional step on your daily stand-up. However, if you feel it's necessary, you definitely, it's a good idea to add that in. And basically what you do is you have your estimated hours. Let's say there's a task that's supposed to take 10 hours. And as they go through on a daily basis, they say, I'm 50% complete and I took 4 hours. I'm 80% complete and I've taken 12 hours. And so you can see by the time they get to 100% every day how many hours they've spent on this particular task. And you can see actuals versus estimated. Now, generally speaking, on average, you're going to see a particular resource either overestimate or underestimate. And then you can self-correct and say, hey, generally speaking, you're 20% over or under. Make sure you correct that. And what happens is they get better at it once they have a mathematical way to adjust. This also helps in your retrospective meetings to make sure you go back and say, hey, what did we do wrong last sprint? Let's adjust, both on the team level and a particular resource level. Another technique that I use is I use the Fibonacci sequence for estimating hours. I like hours for my projects. Days, I think there's too large of a margin of error. The other way to reduce your margin of error from changing days to hours is using a Fibonacci scale. Now, the Fibonacci sequence, otherwise known as the golden ratio, is basically you take the first two numbers, 1 and 2. 1 plus 2 is 3, 3 plus 2 is 5, 5 plus 3 is 8, 8 plus 5 is 13, and so on, that Fibonacci sequence. Now, what I do is I have them estimate anywhere between 0 to 8 hours, sometimes 13, but I never exceed 13. But let's stick with 8 hours for now. And I tell everybody the reason why you don't have an option for 4 hours or 6 hours is as the task grows, the complexity of the task grows exponentially with it. So it makes it easier for them to anticipate that margin of error with the additional complexity when you have that Fibonacci sequence. It just increases faster and faster exponentially. And the other reason is why I cap it off at 8 and I don't pass 8 or 13 sometimes, is because at a certain point you're putting way too much work into one task. If you need more than 8 hours, break it up into 2 separate tasks, and thus your estimations will be more accurate. Anytime you have a team member that says, oh, this particular task is going to take me 25 hours, know your margin of error is throwing you off by weeks. So you really want to bring them down to where they're manageable sizes. No task should be over 8 to 13 hours maximum, and you'll see your margin of error be a lot better than that. The other side of it is, again, based on their focus factor and their velocity, you shouldn't be committing more than 65-70% of their time to development. So that extra 30-35% should be anticipating any margin of error as well. So I hope that helps. I feel my developers are lazy and are not working hard enough. That could be so, and it could be the environment that you're in. Generally speaking, developers aren't necessarily lazy. They don't like to be burnt out. And there's a lot of environments where it's just really tough work constantly. There's always a fire on Friday that needs to be resolved by Monday. And this is just a toxic environment where you're just going to burn out your developers. Assuming that's not the case, you need to think whether you're influencing the environment in terms of, are you dealing with your resources as robots? Are you dealing with them as problem solvers? Now, people tend to have the tendency to deal with developers as robots. Here, just do what you're told, knock that out. This is actually bad in 2 ways. The first point is, if you want robots, that's how you create robots. Just do what you're told, and now they're not thinking or questioning or challenging any thought that you give them. And the other side is that they're sort of disconnected from the project. They say, well, I just did what you told me to do, so if it's wrong, it's not my fault. So what you want to do is bring them into becoming the problem solvers. Have them address the solutions. Anytime there's a problem, even when you say, hey guys, I think the team is not working optimally, or I think we're not working as hard as we can. How can you help me solve this? And so they'll come to you with solutions. Generally speaking, if you come to them with a solution, it's just human nature, and specifically with software engineers, they're going to come back to you and challenge whatever you say. However, if you solicit them to become part of the solution, then now it's a challenge that they can give you a solution to your problem. Another thing is make sure that there's friendly competition amongst them. When you have your daily stand-ups, you make sure that everybody's there, everybody's paying attention, so that they can see amongst their peers how they're performing. Now remember, you have daily meetings. You're supposed to be religious about this. If it's at 9 a.m., it's 9 a.m., not 9:01. Now, when you have your daily stand-ups, you make sure everybody knows who's falling behind and who's not on a daily basis, so that you don't accrue a large debt. So if somebody was, not feeling too well, being a little bit lazy, whatever it is, you call them out on that daily stand-up. And at the end of the week, you make sure that you have a corrective cycle. What does that mean? You send out an email with all the to all the resources and the business owners on who's in debt, who needs to pay off a debt over the weekend, and make sure that it's resolved by Monday. Again, we don't want anybody to work overtime. We don't want anybody to work over the weekend. However, if you accrue a debt, you have to pay it off. We can't wait till the end of the sprint to try to pay off a 20-hour debt. It's just not going to happen. So you need to correct and point out daily, and then make sure you do a hard correction by Friday so that Monday you're back to zero and nobody's accrued a debt. If you let the debt accrue, you're going to have a bigger problem that you just can't pay down that debt. The other thing that I would suggest is if a developer is singled out and their heart's not into it for some reason, you could always do a performance plan. Generally what I do is I'll sit with a developer and I'll explain to them, hey, you're not performing well. Do you need help? Can I help you? And do you need help from your peers? Do you need help from me? Can I aid you in any which way? Because this just cannot continue. And you get strike 1, 2, and 3. Strike 1 and 2, I'm very clear. I'm going to do everything in my power to make you succeed. By strike 3, they know it's coming up because, again, it's mathematical. They can see that you can track everything. And if you need to part ways at that point, generally it's not that painful, even though firing anybody is always painful. But they sort of understand and see it coming. And they knew that you did everything in your power to avoid that situation. So unfortunately, sometimes that's the case if you have just one developer that is not performing on a consistent basis. Next point, priorities keep changing. Yeah, that sort of happens with a lot of companies. Now, you could be part of the problem. So if this is a startup and it's just you and you're the only person dictating that, you're what sometimes referred to as the ideas person. And so you get all these fantastic ideas coming in your head, and you just want to start acting on them while they're fresh. Well, then you're never going to get anything done. Everything's going to be half-baked, and then stop what you're doing and let's work on this new project. So you need to make sure that you're not part of that problem. However, if you're managing a team for a larger company where you have multiple stakeholders and decision makers, you need to make sure that they're bought into the process. You need to make sure that they understand that for them to get the optimal output, they need to follow process as well. So you need to remind them of that. The other thing is maybe your sprint is too large. If you have a 4-week sprint and they just can't bite their tongue for 4 weeks, make it 3 weeks, 2 weeks. 1 week, you can get down there if you're ready for it. 1-week sprints are pretty aggressive. However, you have that flexibility to say, what are you willing to commit to? If I'm at a 4-week, but you can't commit to that and you want to be at a 2-week cycle, let's make our sprints 2 weeks, but you commit to the 2 weeks. After that, you need to be okay telling people no, or not now, or let's bake that out. And because you got to understand, if you have a 2-week cycle, on average, people will interrupt you in the middle. So all they have to do is wait 1 week. And so if they can't wait 1 week, maybe it's time for you to start setting expectations that they just can't come and interrupt anytime they want. Another thing is always explain the cost to whoever's asking you. And the cost is, again, make sure the cost is their pain, not your pain. Now, you're going to make me work these extra days to make sure that it gets done. They need to understand that you're costing the company money, or whatever pain that they feel, make sure it's addressed to their pain. And the cost may be, if I do feature A for you, that means feature B is not going to be completed, and make sure that they understand that. And then send out an email to all the stakeholders saying, hey, everybody, we're not going to do B because manager X wants this new feature in. And so you make sure that everybody is aware, it's transparent, and that this decision maker, whenever they butt heads with other decision makers, they understand that's a discussion amongst themselves. It's nothing wrong with your team and what you're doing. You just make sure that it's transparent and everybody understands the consequences of intervening in a cycle that was agreed upon and then changed midway. Production support is too big and is getting bigger. Okay, so this basically, this happens as well, especially in startups. This happens because you accrue a debt. So just a quick recap, production support is a portion of your sprint that you always allocate for anticipated, unanticipated items coming in. So I don't know what is in production that is going to have a bug that's going to fail, what fire is going to come up, what urgent priority is going to come up. I don't know. I just know that it will come up. So what we do is we allocate 15 to 20%, no more than that, of the sprint that are just buckets of hours reserved for production support. Anything that's in production that needs our support. And so if there's a bug in production and a customer explains that, hey, I need this fixed because it's part of my critical path, you can anticipate that part of your sprint without jumbling everything around. Now, sometimes you get too many of those. There's just fires left and right, servers are going down, whatever it is, you have your development team constantly in a scramble, and they're being reactive and not proactive. So what happens there, if you see that you're exceeding a 15-20% constantly, what you need to do is just stop what you're doing and have a sprint dedicated to burning down your debt. No creation of any new features. You just make sure whatever backlog of debt that you have that comes in from customer support or internal bug reporting, you make sure you burn all of that down until you're at a healthy state again. Once you're at a healthy state again, you can go back to your backlog and start dealing with all the new features that are coming in. If you don't do that, you're just building on a poor foundation. You're just going to accrue more and more debt, and it's going to cause your customers to be unhappy, development taking longer, and your sprints not to be predictable because they're constantly being intervened with P1 tickets, just high priority tickets. I try to allocate my resources, however, it always seems lopsided. So that's common as well. So basically, whenever you're allocating a particular sprint, and let's call it a 3-week sprint, you have, let's say, 2 developers, QA, and a designer. You'll find that your developers are constantly fully engaged, and your QA are at a portion of the developers. They have some free hours. Same thing with your designers. Now, at a certain point, if your team is that small, the ratios between developers and QA need to fit your solution. Generally speaking, and this is just a rule of thumb, for all of the development man hours that you have, 20 to 25% should be QA, 20 to 25 should be design. If it's taking more than that, then you have a problem in your process. If QA is constantly coming back with more and more cycles, you have an issue. So if you have 1 developer and 1 QA resource, well, you're constantly going to be lopsided because QA is just going to sit there and wait. So if it's at 2025, you want 4 or 5 developers for every 1 QA, and that should be a healthier ratio. Now, let's assume that you have that. QA at the beginning of a sprint is going to throw up their hands and say, well, I'm waiting for the developers to give me something to test. I have nothing to test now. But that's actually not true. There's a lot of preparation to happen prior to actually functionally testing these new features. And what you want to do there is you set up just like in the spec, we talked about having how to test. Well, there's a technical side for the how to test as well. That, let's say you're developing a mobile application. You want to make sure that you test on Android and iOS. You want to make sure you test on phones and tablets. You want to make sure that you test in offline mode and live mode when GPS is turned on and off and so on. There's a lot of these cases that QA should be able to anticipate, write them down for the developers, and when I hand this developer the sheet, they're supposed to, during their testing, make sure that they've tested everything on this list before it's handed over to QA, and that reduces the QA cycles. But the QA is supposed to do that at the very beginning of the sprint while the developers are developing. The other thing you want to do is make sure your developers on a weekly basis have something delivered to QA. So some developers, let's say they have 10 different items, they'll just incrementally move each item until they're completed, and then all at once in QA. Well, that doesn't work for us. We need to make sure that you portion out and modularize your code. Make sure that you develop one segment, give that to QA. Another segment, give that to QA. Now, you will get some feedback from your QA resource saying that that's all fine and dandy, but at the end I need to do one sweep of the entire project to make sure nothing regressed. So if you test a module and move on, sometimes that regresses with the additional modules that are coming in. That is correct. However, that is part of the process. And you make sure that when that happens, these modular testing and then the entire system testing for any regression goes to production, you'll actually see there's a lot less bugs in production. Same thing for the designers. The designers, once they've given the designs to the developer, generally the designers are a sprint ahead, just dealing with the future sprint. But the designers should be part of the QA process of the current sprint. So if I give you a design, I should be able to go into the actual product at the end and make sure that my designs are actually implemented the way they were intended. The other thing is, just like designers are a sprint ahead, QA could also be reading up on the specs that are coming up in the next sprint so that they can prep for that. So anytime you have extra cycles with QA, make sure that they're prepping the technical how-to test and prepping for next sprint. With designers, make sure that they're part of the QA cycle as well, testing out the designs, and that the QA also helps with and helping out with the QA cycles for the designers, that they come back and also help with the QA process and making sure that the current sprint design matches the initial specs that were given to them by the designers. So that's it. I hope that helps. If you have more questions, make sure you contact me. Thank you for watching.
I hope you enjoyed that video. If there's a topic you'd like me to talk about, feel free to contact me on any one of these links below. If you'd like me to help on one of your projects, feel free to contact me as well.